Moses came down from the mountain and he said, well, I've got good news and I've got bad news. They said, what's the good news? He said, I've talked God down from 10 to 9 commandments. He said, oh, what's the bad news? He said, adultery is still in there. That's pretty bad. Pretty bad, sorry. That's one of those seminary jokes that we tell 2 in the morning when we're distressed about other things. We don't like rules, and yet we need rules. They help us, they guide us, and we find little ways to push back here and there. I'm not asking for a show of hands. How many? No, you don't even need to respond. But I know that if you're like me, when the speed limit says 55 and you edge it up to 59, you think it's still okay. It's not really okay, but I probably won't get caught because it's not at 60. But if it's at 60, they may catch me, but I'm going to leave it at 59. I'm not going to ask for a show of hands. We find ways to push limits because they make us feel restricted. And yet, we're aware that we need them in our lives. Every 3 years in the United Church of Christ, all the clergy that are active have to go to what's called boundary training. And we have to have a day of workshops and lessons. And we have to sign off on, they have to sign off on us that we completed it. And it talks about good sexual ethics, good sexual boundaries, financial boundaries, make sure that we don't dabble in money and respect that, elder care, and other things that are important in the life of the church as a pastor. And they're all important things. Some clergy resent it. They say, I shouldn't have to do that every 3 years. They just repeat the same thing. But I always get something new out of it. I always learn something new out of it and feel that it's a good, healthy practice to have that boundary training. And so do not resent it. When my kids were little, I took a parenting class called Active Parenting. This is in the late 80s. And it was so helpful to me. It talked about how restricted parenting, parents will draw a really small boundary, and the kids will have to behave within that. But sort of loosey-goosey parenting is that there's no boundary at all, and kids are able to just bounce around wherever. And it said that the democratic parenting is what we need, and that is where you draw a boundary wide enough that it still feels safe, but that the kids have lots of room to grow and make mistakes and bounce around. I've always thought that was a good metaphor for life in general, not just in parenting. Of having rules that provide a boundary. But within that boundary, there's room to grow. There's room to explore. There's even room to challenge sometimes when we feel that those rules are unfair. For instance, if there are rules that say, you know, the very rich get to get off with paying very little percentage in taxes, but everybody else has to pay a larger percentage, that's a rule I'm going to push back on. I don't like that rule, and I don't think it's fair. So I want the rules that we all live by to be fair rules. So we get this passage from Exodus. Remember the story. Moses has been on the mountain. He's experienced the awe and wonder. And God says, Moses, not everyone is here who needs to be here. Go back down. And Moses obeys God and goes back down and is the catalyst for liberation for his people who are enslaved. And they come out and they're now free from slavery. But they don't yet know freedom. They know what it's like to no longer be enslaved, but they're still sorting out what it means to be free. And God knows what it means to be free. They need rules to live by. And so the voice comes out of the mountain again in the mist, in the mystery, that says, these are the commands that the community lives by. And that's how the Ten Commandments came about. Now, later on in the New Testament, there's some trashing of the law. They say, we don't live by the law, we live by Christ. But I'm going to just hold off on that, because the law came not as a sense of obligation for the Hebrew people. It came as a gift. It came as a gift on how to create community, how to live with each other. They knew what it was like to no longer be slaves, but they didn't know what it was like to live in community together. And God knew that they needed that structure. And you know, it's interesting when you explore these. When I took Hebrew class, there was a lot I didn't understand at all, even the Ten Commandments. Like, for instance, honor your father and mother. What is that about? When I was a kid, my mother would quote it when I would talk back to her. Remember, the Bible says to honor your father and mother. So, be quiet, young man. That was sort of the next line. But when in Hebrew class, I learned that what that meant was, in ancient societies, when a woman could no longer bear children, or a man could no longer work in the field, they were disregarded. They were devalued. They were seen as not being full persons. And so, in the Ten Commandments, when it says to honor your father and mother, it meant your older parents. And it was a way of saying their value is not based on what they produce. Their value is based on the fact that they are children of God. Period. That's it. So to honor your father and mother is to say you are God's child, you are God's beloved, no matter what you do. Powerful stuff, isn't it? And then another one I remember was the whole thing about don't swear. Don't use God's name in vain. Well, I was always told that was cussing, right? That's not what it meant. It meant don't make a vow. Don't say, I swear by God. Because no human can ever live up to the promise of always getting it right. So if you swear, don't swear by God, because you don't want to violate that. I remember walking out of Hebrew class that day, and the whole group of us were just cussing like crazy. We thought, oh wow, now we can cuss. The Ten Commandments were there as a gift. It helped them find what it meant to be community. They weren't unique in the world with that. There were other communities that were doing the same thing at the same time. We know that the most ancient law, at least on written record, goes back to ancient Samaria, some 2,000 years even before the Ten Commandments was probably written. And it emphasized things like, don't hurt the widow. Don't hurt the orphan. Don't hurt the poor. Wow. And we know that if we could see the written records in the ancient Polynesians, the indigenous Australians, indigenous Africans, they didn't write down their codes, but those codes were enacted probably about the same time from an evolutionary standpoint all across the globe. People, no matter where they lived, needed guidelines, Kahu. They needed guidelines to live with each other. Now, one of the worst things that can happen, if you ask me, is taking these Ten Commandments, which were seen as a gift, and using them as a prop to manipulate people. Right now, there are legislatures that are requiring the Ten Commandments to be in every classroom in Texas, in Louisiana. That's absurd to me. They don't really want kids to look at those Ten Commandments. It's a way of saying, if you don't comply with our Christian views, then something's wrong with you. That's a misuse of this gift of commandments. It came as a way of saying community is important. And how we live together is important. How we treat each other is important. When Jesus listed the Beatitudes, Matthew's real clever. Luke doesn't do this so much. Jesus just comes out with it in Luke. But in Matthew, Jesus goes up to the mountain. And it's almost as if the writer wants us to see the parallel between the Ten Commandments and the Beatitudes. What a clever literary way to remember those commands. And then we see later in the New Testament that the Apostle Paul has his own list. They're a little different, but we call that the fruit of the Spirit. Patience and kindness and self-control. How to treat one another. And so it seems that not just the ancient Hebrew people or people from all over the world, but as time went on, people were adjusting those ideas and coming up with new ways to treat, asking the question over and over, how do we treat each other? How do we honor each other in community? Now here's the thing that we all know. I certainly know it as a pastor. You know it as people in the church. Community is messy. There's always dysfunction. There's always personality things where people bump up against each other. Someone's mad at someone, someone's offended. That is just part of being in community. It's part of being in a family. It's part of being in a church. It is what happens when we live life together. But when we don't live life together, it's lonely. We don't get the support we need. Our prayer time is a great example of what it means to be in community. We come here, we may know some of those prayers already, but when we sit together, even if we don't know the person being prayed for, we're all connected to what's being said. We're all part of each other, and we get to pray for each other, not just when we're here, but when we leave this place, we recall through the week those prayers. And we're reminded that we're bound together by something deeper and more powerful. What it means to be community. As a pastor, I was always looking for ideas and things that really expressed my own viewpoint. And I found this quote in M. Scott Peck's book, The Different Drum. And I want to read it to you. Because for me, it really signifies what community can mean. It says something like this. Community is a safe place precisely because no one is attempting to heal or convert you, to fix you, to change you. Instead, the members accept you as you are. You are free to be you. And being so free, you are free to discard defenses, masks, disguises, free to seek your own psychological and spiritual health, free to become your whole and holy self. That's community to me. We don't always do it. I don't always achieve it. None of us do. But it's a worthy goal. What would it be like that if every person that entered any of our circles of family, church, larger community, if they walked away feeling their whole self the way God intended, and their holy self the way God intended. Wow, that would be an achievement. What a worthy goal for us as a church, as a community. Martin Luther King used to talk about the beloved community, becoming the beloved community. That was his vision of community, of church, of a nation. And he didn't come up with that idea. It was a fellow by the name of Josiah Royce, who was a teacher at Harvard back in the early 1900s. And Royce believed that there is a danger when any one individual is driven by their ego and dominates to the point where it shuts every other voice down, every other idea down. And that if you want to see a community or a nation self-destruct quickly, all you need to do is put someone like that in charge. So a beloved community was the opposite, where everyone is honored, where every voice is seen as important, where every individual gets to participate in a group, in a messy way, but in a way that honors the God-given beauty and dignity of each person. So when Martin Luther King talked about a nation as a beloved community, he meant one where all were included, where little black children and little white children could play together and honor each other, where rules and laws were for everyone, not just for some. And that vision, folks, is part of our continuance. When I read the Ten Commandments, I don't see restrictions of, oh my gosh, how am I ever going to do that? I see that somehow in these ancient Hebrew people's journey, they were able to listen enough to know that there was a gift in coming together as a community, in being together, in building a messy life together as a people. Martin Luther King understood that too. Jesus and Paul understood that too. When Josiah Royce wrote about it in the early 1900s, he had these words, which I just love. He said, "To act as to hasten its coming." That's the goal of the beloved community. To act as to hasten its coming. One of the students was FDR. And in FDR's inauguration speech, he quoted that quote from Josiah Royce. We all don't have to have a fancy quote. All we have to do is bump up against each other, with each other, in this place called Wānanalua, in this place called Hāna. And together, we get to hear and feel and experience the gift of community. Amen.